Yeah. So,
Good to go, sir. We are ready.
good evening, everybody, and good morning to Father Alexander Kurian and to Sri Nallapeti. Both of them are in the United States of America. Good evening to you and to all our guests and our well-wishers, our viewers. Very hearty good evening from Center for Policy and Development Studies. Uh, we are today in a webinar. The webinar is uh, on in the new US government and India. And we have with us a very good, a very knowledgeable, and I mean to say the policy makers, those who made policies, those who are making policies, and who are embarrassed and well versed of the Indo-US relations and the US policies. I do welcome the TP Srinivasan sir. TP Srinivasan sir, as everybody knows, can be considered as one of the most senior diplomats of India. He served as the is a former deputy chief of mission of the Indian Embassy in Washington D.C. and permanent representative of India in the United Nations in Vienna. TP Srinivasan sir was also with the government of Kerala as the chairman of the Higher Education Council here in Kerala, and is a seasoned writer. And he had recently published a book, More Diplomacy, which has been well received by the bookworms, or rather the literary circles. I had the opportunity to interact with him in two book festivals, in Literary Festival of Madhuribhumi in Trivandrum last year, and again Center for Policy and Development Studies is thankful to TP Srinivasan sir for having attended in our program at Chennai, More Diplomacy. We had a good live session at Shankar IAS Academy. And Srinivasan sir has been a regular participant for Center for Policy and Development Studies. And I heartily welcome the TP Srinivasan IFS, retired as senior diplomat of the Government of India, who has served several missions of the Washington, Vienna, and he was also the Indian ambassador in Fiji Islands when there was a coup, and he made a very powerful diplomacy there in the Fiji Islands. I welcome Mr. TP Srinivasan to the program. This new US government and India. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I do welcome Father Alexander Kurian. Father Alexander Kurian uh, is an Orthodox priest, and he's with the U.S. government. Fa- Father Alexander Kurian is a senior priest of the Indian Orthodox Church. Father Kurian leads a well-balanced spiritual and secular life. Father Kurian has been a senior management consultant for 14 years before joining the U.S. Department of State as the managing director of the Office of Strategic Planning, the first person of Indian origin to ever sit in the chair from 1978 to 2014. In this position, he managed 18 major State Department international programs and have traveled through 147 countries, conducting bilateral negotiations and built 138 brand new US embassies and consulates. Achan spent 15 months in Iraq and 6 months in Afghanistan during the war to establish diplomatic platforms across Iraq and Afghanistan. In September 2014, Achan was appointed by President Barack Obama as the Deputy Associate Administrator of the Office of Government-wide Policy under the Executive Office of President. This is the highest rank of the civil service. He is responsible for developing and implementing effective government-wide policies and guidance to provide a structured framework for agencies to achieve economical and effective management process for government assets for the American people. Father Alexander has served under 5 successive US presidents. He is now proudly serving under President Biden and Vice President Harris, where he continues to manage 9 policies, including expeditiously to implement new policies under the current administration. Achan was also appointed as Executive Director of the Federal Real Property Council. I wholeheartedly welcome Reverend Father Alexander Kurian for this program. A hearty welcome from India to Father Kurian. Namaste from Center for Policy and
Thank you.
Development Studies. We have Sri Prasad Nallapatti. Prasad sir is also in Washington these days. Uh, he's the president of the Center for Asia Africa Policy Research in Hyderabad, and retired from government service, Indian government service after 31 years in 31 years of service. He retired in 2015 as additional secretary in the cabinet secretariat. He has served in several diplomatic positions in Indian embassies in Israel, Russia, USA, etc. Also served in various capacities in Central Security Services. MSc is an MSc in Psychology and MA in Ancient Indian History. I wholeheartedly welcome Prasad sir, Prasad Nallapatti sir from India. A good morning to you and a good evening to all Indians. So I think we will straight away go to the program. I do invite TP Srinivasan sir to roll the ball, or rather to set the
Ball rolling.
evening in motion. Srinivasan sir, for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun.
Third webinar today's.
Thank you very much, Arun, and other distinguished panelists who seem to know the government of the United States from inside. I have known it only from the outside. Well, this is now a sport in India. Everyone wants to know what India-US relations will be under Mr. Biden. So this is a question that's being asked every day, webinars, conferences, discussions, and so on. So almost all the points have been exhausted. If I may summarize the situation, how people see it. Some people say that this will be excellent because Mr. Biden has ancestors in East India Company. He has been a vice president of one of the friendliest presidents, Barack Obama, and he has much respect for his vice president, who is partly of Indian origin. He has taken 20 Indian advisors in the administration. So everything is wonderful. There will be a beautiful relationship between India and the US. On the other hand, some people see ghosts of Pakistan, ghosts of China, and human rights. They think that these three things might somehow create problems when Mr. Biden becomes president, because he has already become president. So these are the two views. And I must say this is a kind of tunnel vision of India-US relations, having seen India-US relations for many years. First of all, we need to turn the other side and see whether India can be of help to the United States. This question nobody seems to ask. I don't know whether there are people in Washington asking that question, whether the Indians or the Indian Americans, can they help President Biden in his tremendous task, humongous task that he is facing? We know the situation. He has not heard the last of President Trump. Many things are yet to happen, and his promise to appear in some form still looms large on the horizon of the United States. And he has millions of challenges, starting from the coronavirus to China, to climate change, name it, because the last 4 years of darkness, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And he is the man who is providing that light. And that is a heavy responsibility because behind him is this large tunnel of darkness. So what I would like to touch upon are the possibilities of India being helpful to President Biden in his tremendous responsibility. And that is a way to look at it better than looking at it from what can Mr. Biden do for us. I think that will be a slightly different approach that I am adopting. So what is his first concern? Of course, coronavirus. He has no magic wand to completely cure the problem. He has very many constraints, starting from inadequate preparation by the people because they were all in some kind of a magic world. And now still there is hesitancy about using of the vaccines. There are not enough vaccines. And therefore, that is the biggest task that he has. And we all know that thanks to China, there is no international effort, coordinated international effort to meet the coronavirus. Here we cannot do much, but of course we should be proud of the Indian doctors working in the United States. Large number of Indian doctors. You know, you must have all heard about the famous organization called API. The best physicians, best surgeons, Vivek Murthy is one of them. So we can find satisfaction in the fact that Indians, if not India, is helping President Biden in this. That's a plus point. As far as India is concerned, we have a vaccine diplomacy, which basically tries to supply India-made vaccines to developing countries. We at the moment do not have a plan. And also there must be problems about generic medicines and vaccines in the United States. Maybe Indian vaccines may not be acceptable, etc. But if there is a request or if there is a demand from the Biden administration, I'm sure that it should be possible for us to help. The second biggest problem that President Biden is facing is the Indo-Pacific and China. In this particular case, this is the only issue on which President Biden has already said that he will follow President Trump's policies. So here we have a win-win situation because India-China relations are at the lowest ebb at the moment. And if other countries have the same problem, similar problems with China, that will only be helpful to us. And how do we deal with this? General Lloyd Austin has already said that he would further operationalize India as major defense partnership and through the Quad security dialogue and other multilateral agreements. So this is the best that we can do to help the United States deal with China, is to cooperate in the Indo-Pacific and also understand their sensitivity and the need for the Quad. We have some hesitations here. We want to have strategic freedom in strategic autonomy, not only between other countries, but also in the Indo-Pacific itself. Our foreign minister has said that multipolarity is not only globally, but also in the Indian Ocean. So this has a certain meaning because we do not see the possibility of an immediate military alliance in the Indo-Pacific. When President Trump, of course, had gone to the extreme end by supporting India fully without any hesitation and talking about strengthening India vis-a-vis China. And we do not expect the same to happen from Mr. Biden. He'll be more balanced, like in everything else. He'll be more balanced, he'll be more predictable, he will be rational, he will take the advice of the experts. From this, we can understand that he will have a slightly nuanced position about China. And that might suit us because we are not being asked to join any military alliance or anything of that kind. And therefore, in this particular question, we have a prospect of working together in very, very many ways. So then we should ask whether, when we say whether Mr. Biden will be helpful to us, we should also look at whether we have been helpful to the Democratic Party in the last 4 years. And the truth of the matter is that we have not been. Of course, in 2016 elections, we expected Hillary Clinton to win, but when it did not happen, we did what we normally do, is deal with the elected government, whoever he is. We have had to support strong governments, we had to support weak governments, principled ones, unprincipled ones, etc. So we do not make a distinction between ideology when we come to somebody who is in power. So it is in that spirit that Prime Minister Modi worked out a good relationship. And it is, I don't think it was very cordial or without problems, because President Trump was not predictable. He could say anything to you at a particular moment and then hug you in the next moment. So it was a tense relationship, but Mr. Modi realized the value of working with the president. And in a way, I must say, he tamed him in the sense that he directed him towards, and he played to his ego by going to Houston and saying that Agle Bar, Trump Sarkar, and things like that. And these were all criticized, and many people said that this was wrong, etc., etc. But I see it quite very much as a management of the president, of the peculiar president that the United States had. And then he, of course, celebrated him even in India. And this might have given some kind of a message to the Indian Americans, who, many of them, changed their loyalty from Democratic Party to Republican Party. The calculation was about 20% had shifted. But as soon as Mrs. Kamala Harris was selected as the vice president, at least 10% returned. But still about 10% of the Indian community voted for Mr. Trump. And some of them have been very vocal, as we saw a fellow Keralite holding an Indian flag and marching into, not into the Capitol Hill, but at least nearby there. So there have been strong support for President Trump, and that continues. So the certain sections of the Indian community thought that Trump's Muslim ban was a very good thing. And also, some boycott of the Democratic congressman happened, congresswoman perhaps, in the context of some severe criticism from the Democratic Party. And so this so-called Trump-Modi bromance and the endorsement of Trump and also the shifting in the Indian community created a certain amount of gap in the bipartisan support to the Indo-US relations. But Mr. President Biden does not appear to have taken these to heart when he chose his running mate or chose other Indian Americans for his inner circle. He may have been pleased that his choice of Kamala Harris was accepted by the Indian community. Many people said that she treats herself as a Black American leader. And still, I think the support was quite spontaneous. Celebrations were held in Chennai. Huge contributions were made to the party. And also, Indians were generally proud of Kamala Harris and also the possibility of her becoming the president one day. So the richer Indian Americans were attracted by Trump's policies, but now they have readjusted that. So what we need from all this, what I'm saying is, it's not the time yet for a honeymoon with President Biden. We would all like to do that, but I think the period ahead will be one of reconciliation, understanding, identification of common ideas, and working hard to help each other. So as far as COVID is concerned, I already said that we have a limited role there. And in China, there is a bigger role. And the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has already said that Joe Biden will continue with the policies of the Trump administration vis-a-vis China, including issues related to the maritime disputes over Beijing's assertiveness in the South China Sea, the Indo-Pacific, and the strategic approach to step up defense ties with the Quad member countries comprising India, the US, Japan, and Australia. Here the difference is that he did not mention the Himalayas, because his predecessor spoke also about tension in the Himalayas that Mr. Blinken excluded. And also, Mr. Blinken was not critical of the Chinese as Mr. Pompeo was. Pompeo never referred to Chinese government. He always referred to the People's Army and People's PLA, and also the Central Communist Party, and referred to the chairman as a secretary of the party. So they used very harsh words. And all these were very music to our ears. But now it's going to be different. And if we do not shy away from the Quad, I think we should be able to work with him on this. The next important issue in which he might look for some support from us is Iran. I have my own experience of the Americans telling us again and again that you have good relations with Iran. Why don't you help us with this regime? See, you seem to know them, civilizational relations, etc. But they are never asking us to negotiate for them. No, that is not what they are saying. That they have enough ways to do. But what they expected Indians was to tell the Iranians the importance of peace in the region, the importance of not manufacturing nuclear weapons. And we ourselves are not interested in an Iranian nuclear weapon state in our backyard. So the US knows that India, like most of the Western world, would not like to see a nuclear Iran and expects India to be supportive of the efforts in the Atomic Energy Agency. I was myself there from 2002 to 2004, when Iran issue was very hot. And we balanced the two. We said that Iran is a NPT signatory, so they must honor that. And at the same time, we said Iran has the right to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. So we could maintain that position, but we have difficulties when there are sanctions against Iran, whether it is multilateral or unilateral, and we often have to face the music. So we would very much like the way President Biden is approaching the question. He has said that if Iran fulfills the obligations of the JCPOA, he is also willing to continue. But there is much between the cup and much of a slip between the cup and the lip. It is not going to be so smooth as all that, because there are new actors in this, in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and the shifting relationship between some of the Gulf countries and Israel. So all these add a complication to the Iran deal issue. But if it is not resolved immediately, President Biden will have much difficulty on his hand. The next issue on which he is very much concerned is climate change. And everybody is happy that he has gone back, but we have forgotten that Paris Agreement is not a panacea for all the climate change problems. India itself was very worried about climate change, Paris Agreement, because the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and per capita emissions, the two principles that were fundamental to climate change in our view, were repudiated by the Western countries and not included in the Paris climate change. And as a result, what has happened is everything is voluntary, and what is being given as voluntary will not suffice, because it will be 3.5 per half degree Celsius increase, not 1.5. So what is the use of the climate change, Paris climate change? But the climate czar, John Kerry, has already said that we will move to a non-carbon issue by 2050. And if he presses it very hard, we will be in trouble, because we will not be able to follow those standards. And we'll have to stand with the developing countries, demanding our ability, our capability to develop, and gradually, rather than give up fossil fuels and coal, etc. And there, I think we may end up on two sides of the table. And also reducing greenhouse gas emissions will demand that the developed countries lead the way rather than developing countries being dragged into all these commitments. So these are some of the, what shall I say, the danger signals that I see. But now let me tell you the positive ones. Because the most positive one is that we have a president who is predictable, who is consistent, whose views are known, who will not be depending on tweets for his foreign policy. There's a big change, which is very welcome. The initial steps that he has taken on immigration are satisfactory for us. And they are not asking for any quid pro quo from India. And the Indian competent workforce may benefit from the removal of national quotas for H-1B visas and the opening of a pathway for legitimacy for illegal immigrants. Of course, trade issues, which are a continuing process. Trump had agreed to sign some kind of a trade deal, but he did not fulfill it. And also, Mr. Biden has said that no immediate trade deals, and he wants to see. But I have seen in his reference to the middle-class foreign policy some hope for India, because he's talking about the ability of the products of the middle class in America being sold. So the whole idea of looking at the Biden administration through the prism of immediate gains for India is unrealistic. But the bipartisan nature of the relationship is one positive element. The fact that there are no bilateral issues between India and the United States after the nuclear deal. When I left the US in 2000, I said everything is solved except the nuclear deal. And I didn't expect that the nuclear deal would come within 5 years. Of course, it came within 8 years. And that was the major issue between our two countries, and that is gone. And except for some trade issues, there is really nothing to resolve. So it is a matter of working together with the United States for the common good of the people. And here, revival of multilateralism is very important, and also reform. Because many people are disappointed by the statement made by the ambassador designate to the UN when she said there is no decision to support India. I'm not surprised at all by this, because Mr. Obama's declaration in 2010 was not an assurance of any kind. In fact, several statements have come out of the State Department after that, saying that, this is not a matter which is urgent and we should not hurry up. There are, as she rightly said, there are people who support India, and also there are countries which do not support India. And there is no consensus. And the biggest opposition will come not from the permanent members, but from the non-permanent members who would want to remove the 5 permanent rather than add other 5 permanent members to the UN system. So in the UN reform also, we may not be very happy with the American position unless there is a change. The only permanent member which has supported India in writing is the UK. Because US, apart from Mr. Obama's very friendly and hopeful sign, his expectation, his wish to see India as a permanent member, they have not moved further from that. So this is a whole set of issues. This is not exclusive. So which shows both the minuses and the pluses in India-US relations. And the happiest thing is that we are two democracies. And Mr. Biden has already said that he will have a community of democracies, which was in fact tried by Mrs. Albright when I was in Washington, but didn't work because we could not even define who the democracies were. And the problem will again come. So we have so many positives, but we have to look at it from the perspective of our being helpful to each other, rather than our demanding that Mr. Biden should be friendly to us for this reason and that reason. So there are balancing factors, we must take it into account. That is my plea at this point in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srinivasan sir, for such very good, wonderful, in-depth analysis of the new administration of US, and that the honeymoon period is not yet started. So we will invite, I do invite Father Alexander Kurian, who is in Washington. I invite Father Alexander Kurian to speak on this occasion about the new US government and its relationship with India. Father Kurian.
Thank you, Arun. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank
I can
you.
hear you. I think Srinivas sir and
Yes, I can
Professor
hear.
is also.
You can see him also. And we can see his screen also.
No?
Thank you.
So everything seems perfect.
Hello?
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. Good
Yeah,
morning
okay.
from
Everything's
Washington,
perfect.
D.C. Good morning from Washington, D.C., my dear and respected Srinivasan sir, and also dear Prasad sir, and all the friends on this blog. I really appreciate this opportunity. I just want to set the record straight. I'm not a foreign policy expert in any manner. I migrated myself to the US when I was 16 years old, immediately after finishing my high school. In all my studies here in the US. And while I've been called to serve the people as a priest, I also decided to join the private sector in terms of consulting, and for the last 25 plus years working for the US government in various capacities. So primarily my presentation today and my talk is based on my personal experience as well as my research in this area. I am just like you, a keen on interest in terms of the Indo-US relationship, because again, I still have a lot of families back in Kerala. So I am pretty much interested in terms, and also I have a lot of friends who are Indians with various issues they are facing, from immigration to employment and so on. So I've been studying all these past 25 plus years in terms of the ups and downs of foreign relations, especially in our region. So this is not in any manner a representation of US government policies. It is primarily me as an individual who has great respect as well as relationship with India, as my family is still there, speaking this morning from Washington, D.C. With that thought, I'm going to share my screen. I have prepared a slide presentation. I think my dear and respected Srinivasan sir pretty much touched all the issues that I was going to touch this morning. I'm so happy the fact that we agree on these issues, and I think we are thinking alike in terms of how this all going to churn and settle down within the next 1 to 2 years. I don't think the relationship between India and US will be any controversial. It will be very collegiate. It will be a partnership. It is going to be very collaborative in terms of how the two largest democracies in the world is going to play together to some kind of shape the foreign policy across the globe. With that thought, I'm going to share my screen. As you have heard from Dr. Biden himself, and his quote always being that I will be an ally of the light, not our darkness. I mean, you know where this quote is coming from, and he is somehow summarizing the last 4 years of foreign policies as well as domestic policies that led into darkness. And Mr. Biden already have taken plenty of actions. He already signed 25 plus executive orders in terms of slowly opening that door from darkness into light. As you know that President Biden came into the Oval Office in the midst of 5 deeply intervened crises. The first one is the health crisis for the American people and the world, of course. The economic crisis, especially for the US and certain part of the world. The racial injustice crisis that we have faced in the US. And of course, as my dear colleague, Mr. Srinivasan sir mentioned, the climate crisis, and a very complicated foreign policy platform that has been created by President Trump. According to President Biden, the quote, America first has made America alone. That being clearly stated throughout the last 4 years, that our priority is America, our priority is American economy, our priority is the citizen of America, And that some kind of seclusion into focusing on a nationalism has created definitely a seclusion from the other part of the globe. President Biden has decades of foreign policy experience, as Mr. Srinivasan said, and especially as in his time as the vice president and also the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I think President Biden has a very elaborate foreign policy expertise and experience. I think you're going to see that in terms of how he is shaping his next 4 years in the White House. President Biden administration's utmost focus, of course, will be, it has to be the pandemic. As you know, we have lost more than 475 people in the US, and that is just an understatement in my opinion. That number most probably is close to 600,000 because a lot of people who lost their lives hasn't been accounted for. But in terms of those records that is being kept by Johns Hopkins, we're looking at close to 500,000 people died from this pandemic. So he cannot really hone in on the foreign policy issues immediately until he gets the issues in the US under control. And of course, the pandemic led into recession that has come from it. It is a massive social reckoning from the inattention to systematic racism and social injustice that have been played out by President Trump, who left the office recently. The administration has already begun taking actions as the first priority to those domestic challenges. President Biden, the first executive order, as you know, he signed was in terms of protecting the American people, in terms of wearing masks, as well as the vaccine strategy that he has laid out. And he truly believed that the domestic challenges that been left in front of him to manage is a legacy that been left behind by the 4 years of President Trump in the office. Biden may face pressures from his own party, pressures that will influence his foreign policy, in my opinion. Biden will invest more in education in the US and cutting edge technologies. That plan already been laid out, areas that will create an industrial policy that connects foreign policy and domestic policy. One of the main concerns of our administration is that he may have difficulty managing what I believe will be the inevitable divisions that will emerge between the modern and progressive wings of the Democratic Party, as you have seen and been hearing so far, that could create real problems for Biden in foreign policy by pulling him in opposite directions in the coming weeks. President Biden faces a slew of important foreign policy challenges, as you have heard from Mr. Srinivasan. But with India, he has a historic opportunity to forge a strategic alliance to help build a stable balance of power in Asia and the wider Indo-Pacific region, as Mr. Srinivasan already stated. India has been a bright spot in US foreign policy over the past 2 decades. And I had the pleasure and the blessing of working with Mr. Clinton as well as President Bush. And I had the blessing of traveling with President Clinton and President Bush to India on those historic visits and continuing a process set in motion by President Bill Clinton during the 90s and accelerated by every succeeding administration is going to really help in terms of setting the motion by the Biden administration towards a progressive as well as a positive relationship between US and India. Not surprisingly, there is strong bipartisan support in both Washington and New Delhi for a closer partnership under Biden administration. India has a place, in my opinion, in the American strategy. A strong India in cooperation with like-minded countries could act as a counterbalance to China, as you clearly heard from Mr. Srinivasan. US objective to accelerate India's rise and capacity to serve as a net provider of security in the Indo-Pacific and as America's major defense partner, in my opinion. That stage been set since the 90s under the Clinton administration and beyond. It has to be a fundamental alignment along shared security and geopolitical goals, shared interest and shared values is going to drive that strong relationship between India and US. And of course, you heard the mention of the Quad by Mr. Srinivasan. That is definitely going to keep that relationship pretty close. China's aggressive expansionism has helped drive India's shift toward closer strategic collaboration with the US. Mr. Srinivasan already mentioned that it's going to really play into this relationship. A major turning point was China's decision to stealthily occupy the mountaintops and other strategic vantage points in the borderlands of northernmost Indian region of Ladakh. The depth of strategic collaboration between the world's most powerful and most populous democracies will ultimately be shaped by how Biden is going to play out the China policy. Mr. Srinivasan clearly stated that if Biden is to continue the Trump policy in playing the hard line with China, and then we should not have any issues between India and US in terms of having a very close as well as a strong partnership. If Biden is going to play a shaky relationship and hard line with China, then we're going to have some kind of an issue between India and US in terms of a smooth relationship going forward. Biden has yet to clearly enunciate his approach toward Beijing or his overall Asia policy. Why? Because he is very focused on the US domestic policies to get this coronavirus and the economic challenges that he is facing in the US. So he will not jump right into these kind of deep foreign policy issues anytime soon, but he's shaping it, and his strategists as well as his key advisors are working those issues, and he would definitely lay that out in the near future. Biden's strategy will be geared towards a secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific relationship, in my opinion. I believe personally, President Biden has done well to name the veteran Asia and Kurt Campbell to the newly created position of Indo-Pacific Coordinator on the National Security Council, as mentioned by Mr. Srinivasan. A softer US approach towards Beijing is unlikely to help build the long sought soft alliance with India, in my opinion. So everybody's eyes are definitely on Biden in terms of how he is going to lay out the relationship between China and Washington. Given the bipartisan US consensus and some of his own national security appointments, it is very doubtful, in my opinion, that Biden could return to the more indulgent approach to China of the Obama administration when Beijing engaged in mostly cost-free expansionism. That is not the case today. To be sure, there are also other issues, including Pakistan and human rights, that could impede progress towards India's full involvement in the US-led security architecture. This ought to be mentioned and clearly laid out very poetically by Mr. Srinivasan. A decision to restore US security aid to Pakistan, in my opinion, may set off alarm bells in New Delhi, as it would relieve pressure on Pakistan to curb its well-documented support for terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Haqqani network, and unwittingly contribute to the growing China-Pakistan axis against India. I clearly think that along with China, this concept of how US is going to play out its relationship and his aid and support towards Pakistan is going to clearly play out in terms of how we're going to shape the Indo-US relationship. But at the same time, we cannot overlook at the need of Pakistan for US, for Washington, in terms of how it is going to manage the crisis in Afghanistan. I truly believe, from a personal standpoint, that the relationship will still be there between US and Washington because we need Pakistan to play a small role in terms of shaping the peace in Afghanistan and the support we need for Afghanistan. India's domestic politics mirrors that of the US, in my opinion, in terms of hardened polarization with a widening divide between liberals and conservatives. You have seen that very clearly under the Modi administration. That is one of the reasons that Modi and Trump hit off pretty well in the beginning as well as during the last 4 years. And I think Modi played it really well in terms of how he immediately jumped into the relationship with Trump for shaping that good partnership in the favor of India. President Biden has pledged a renewed US focus on promotion of liberal values and human rights. Biden, during his campaign, criticized, of course, the Modi government's suppression of dissent in the Muslim majority territory of Jammu and Kashmir, as well as a new Indian law to grant citizenship to non-Muslim refugees that fled religious persecution in the three neighboring Muslim majority countries of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. I think this is going to be a key issue in the coming months. I know the critics have branded that law as anti-Muslim, and I believe Mr. Srinivasan already touched this issue. It is my personal opinion that if the new Biden administration were to be openly critical of such issues, it might embolden Modi's critics while turning Indian public opinion against a closer partnership with Washington. I do not think that Biden is going to take a hard line as Trump has in the past. However, Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, whose mother was, of course, an Indian, are likely to pursue a pragmatic approach that prioritizes deeper engagement with India. I strongly believe that. I'm in favor of that. This will include clinching a much sought after trade deal with India, whose huge market is an increasingly powerful magnet for US businesses, forging a partnership with New Delhi on climate change. Mr. Srinivasan already touched that issue, and expanding defense ties. Such a balanced approach is appropriate, for no relationship between any two democracies is as important in today's changing world than the one between US and India. Arguing in benefit of the economy, Biden places immigration as central to the American competitive advantage, charged in spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation. I believe Mr. Srinivasan already touched this issue. Primarily, Biden's immigration policies are reactive to the Trump administration seeking to undo the Trump's damage he has done, working to heal the wounds inflicted on immigrant communities across the United States. Biden will liberalize immigration to the US, welcoming immigrants. This could be a game-changing event for Indian Americans who have been disproportionately affected by the Trump's H-1B visa ban and green card suspension. Biden will definitely expand. He already began laying that foundation in his administration, the number of high-skilled visas and eliminating the limits on employment-based visas by country, which create unacceptably long backlogs that is existing right now. At present, the total annual cap on green cards available for Indians, I believe, is about 20,000, leading to wait times that stretch across decades. When I was migrated to the US back in the late 70s, I believe, it took me less than 3 months to get my green card. Now I believe it is close to 20 years of waiting time. President Biden will do everything possible to work with the US Congress to increase the number of visas awarded for permanent and employment-based immigration. So in my opinion, the way forward between India and US is still out there to be shaped, but based on the history with Biden and his expertise, and also the bipartisan support for a India and US relationship, and also with the ties of Vice President Kamala Harris with India, I believe the relationship between US and India will be a strong partnership, and there will be a lot of collaboration in terms of decisions be made. I think US will be looking to India as a strategic partner in terms of shaping its worldwide foreign policy. And with that thought, I'm going to stop. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. Again, it's been truly a blessing as well as an honor to be on the same platform with Mr. Srinivasan and Mr. Prasad. And I hope that I'll be able to continue this partnership as well as the relationship with the keynote speakers as well as this forum, and stay safe.
Thank you for the Alexander Kurian. It was a well-researched, well-documented talk. I now invite Prasad sir, Mr. Prasad Mallapati. He is the president of Indo-African Policy Research and a former senior bureaucrat with the Government of India in the Cabinet Secretariat. And he has served in Indian missions in Israel, USA, and Russia, and is a strategic expert. I do invite Mr. Prasad Mallapati, again from Washington. A very good morning to you, sir.
I don't hear anything.
Yeah, we don't hear it. Hello? Hello?
You're frozen. I can see him, but he's frozen.
Hello, I cannot see him. Yeah, you can hear. I can hear you now. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I can hear you.
We can see you and hear you.
Can see you, but your lips are not moving, so we don't know whether we are talking or not.
Okay, I think probably there is some problem with my connectivity.
Yeah, some problem with the image.
But we can hear you.
We
can hear you. It's, you hear us. Then you can
Let's do whatever best possible.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you very much for being invited to this wonderful gathering today. And so although currently I'm in Washington, basically of my retirement,
now we can see you.
Where now I'm part of this Center for Asia.
We cannot hear you now.
We can hear you. There is a problem with him, sir. Sir, your audio.
I think it is frozen.
No, it's not paused. There's some technical issues with his audio. Hello, Prasad sir, can you hear us? Prasad sir, can you hear me? Hello.
Ask him to restart.
Yeah, I think he will do it. Sir, can you restart? It will be. You can come back then. You can rejoin. You can leave the meeting and rejoin. I think it will be working. Sai, can you coordinate?
Yes, sir. I'll do that.
Yeah, please.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think this connectivity is terrible today.
No problem, sir. No, it's
We
okay.
just had we had a very high, so I think
Hello.
Yeah, we are having a big snowstorm right now in Washington. So that
Is it? Is it?
a
Okay.
huge snowstorm is already began. So it's supposed to last through Tuesday.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
big blizzards. Yes,
Yeah,
saw it and see it.
exactly. Maybe one of the biggest they're here.
Professor, can you hear us now? Hello. Sai, has he left the meeting or is he rejoining?
Sir is rejoining now.
He's right. Okay. Professor, can you hear us now? Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's audible. Oh, right, tell. Sir, you can proceed, sir. Yeah.
I'm sorry for this problem.
No, it's okay.
So without further any delay, basically let me come to the point. So since much of the ground is already covered by Mr. Srinivasan sir and Mr. Kurian, I think basically I'll touch a little more other nuanced issues. Coming to the point, basically, this administration has already very clearly stated the continuity of the Indo-US relationship. Mr. Blinken already said that India is the bipartisan success story in Washington. The Congress has a bipartisan support for India for a long time. So it is very clearly stated now that it will president or definitely. Can you hear me? Okay. So basically, uh, the path is same, and it will continue the same focus and other things. But coming to the point, basically, we must understand one is that Mr. Biden has inherited a very shaken systems, both domestically and in you have the COVID situation where the entire country is focused on vaccinating their population. Then secondly, there's economy is in bad shape in terms of the unemployment, the supply chain disturbances. And then there's the internal conflict, the racism and particularly the domestic extremism that they are taking a larger share of the administration's attention. Mr. Trump might have gone, but his ideology and his control over Republican Party, I think, will more or less continuing in the same situation. So the Biden administration will face tremendous confrontation, both at the congressional level and other levels. So Mr. Biden's sailing will not be so smooth. So he'll have to encounter a lot of issues during its ability to recover and stabilize the situation in the domestic front. So at the international level, also Trump's administration has shaken up all the relationships in terms of his America First policy. So as Mr. Biden's administration have been saying by all other players there in the cabinet, the first and foremost priority is to bring back those relations and older alliances back to original shape so that the international play can be more coordinated and cooperative effort. So in that particular aspect, I think the Europe is the first priority. So if you see the number of calls made as per the priority, so the first calls always gone to Europe and followed by, of course, Indo-Pacific strategy. I think that's the kind of importance that this administration will have. So China, of course, comes number one in that. So here, as Mr. Srinivasan Sab was saying, that the India's relationship with the US must be seen in terms of how much India is helpful in American strategy internationally. So that defines basically where India's stand would be in the matter of affairs of American strategy abroad. So here, I think a number of aspects are there. Number one is as all the Biden administration cabinet members who are talking to, they spoke to their counterparts in India. The stress has been Indo-Pacific strategy. So their stress has been that how India is helpful. India could go forward helping America adopt this strategy. So America is seeing from that point of view, that is, of course, the significant aspect of Indo-US relationship, if it has to go forward further. So here, of course, we have our own concerns, but basically here we are in a situation where our interests and American interests quite joined together in terms of the difficulties that we are facing from China on the northern border. So America may not be come and help us, India, in terms of like any other allied countries, because we are not an allied partner. So in terms of physically coming and helping would not be there, but in terms of their assistance in intelligence sharing, the military cooperation, supporting some defense equipment, I think that's going to be there. Trump administration has done quite a Defense Secretary Austin has said that they want to take this defense cooperation to the higher level. So they are talking in terms of the main defense partnership. So there will be more of talks about sharing logistics, the sharing of more facilities of each other's. And Americans probably would like us to have more participation in terms of joint patrols or joint exercises in the South China Sea. So, but that would be, I think, would be a bit difficult for us, and which we have explained to the Americans in great detail, and they understand that. So similarly, the Southeast Asian countries have also have their own difficulties and doubts. So they are not very clear where American support, American presence will be on the continuous basis because of Trump administration and before Obama administration. The policies have been ups and downs. So uh, the Southeast Asian countries are not really fully not fully convinced of American ability to support them. So they are hedging their bets in terms of uh, playing both Chinese and American interests there. So even the most important allies like South Korea is not willing to come completely identify with the American strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy there. So much so also the Indonesia. So Japan now currently has the changeover in the government that probably weakens, in my mind, the commitment to various other aspects of the Indo-Pacific strategy because the current Prime Minister Sugu's popularity is declining, so the elections are coming. So I think the political instability may create certain problems there. But the most positive factor coming from this administration is that all the members, at least rhetorically, they have been saying they will continue this Indo-Pacific strategy, not only continuing, but also taking to the next level as Trump administration was saying before. So here, what are the other next stages involved in Asia-Pacific is, sorry, Indo-Pacific is that expansion of Quad. So here, I think Britain is planning to join the Quad. So there's some discussions going on. Though France, of course, has already is involved in Indo-Pacific in a bigger way. So whether they would actually join Quad or not, but their support is there. But the two countries that are expected, Americans would like them to join, South Korea and Indonesia, I think they are reluctant to join because that would anger China. And so there may be still a long way to go before they are convinced to get into Quad and others. So Indo-Pacific strategy is basically is a bigger area where India can contribute and India can participate in building a peaceful and free domain, sea domain here. Another factor perhaps is that always that Americans wanted, but somehow it didn't happen since the Obama administration was pivoting to Asia. So as much as the administration wanted to move to Asia Pacific, their commitments and their concentration was drawn back to the Middle East. So Middle East is increasingly is unstable. So that leaves little time for little, I think, resources for the Americans to shift from the Middle East to Asia. So here the Iran is a problem. Now the Saudis are increasingly under will put US stay put there in that area. So how much they really could focus back to Asia is somewhat a question mark. So here, so India has a role to play in terms of, although we cannot really go to South China Sea and other things, we have a dominant status in Indian Ocean region. So I think that's where that we have to we might contribute a little more to American strategy, even including in the Middle East. So the Indo-Pacific area domain has long been a kind of discussion and dispute between Quad members. How much is the territory that expands comes into the Indo-Pacific region? So although India wants it's from the East Africa coast up to the Malacca Straits, which I think the Biden administration, I mean the Trump administration towards the end has come to some kind of understanding on that. I think so. Here, as US perhaps wants to move more towards South China Sea and Indian Ocean, so India perhaps can help in terms of expanding into covering this East African coast and Red Sea areas, where I think we have certain ability to do so. I think probably Biden administration and India might be discussing in the coming days probably how we can play a little more positive role in Indian Ocean, the extended Indian Ocean, starting from the east coast of Africa. So I think that could prove to be a lot more effort, cooperative effort between the two countries. But there are other still major areas that Mr. Srinivasan has touched as far as the foreign policy issues are. Number one, I think, is the problem that we have with Americans is Russia. So we have the two major aspects in this. So I keep hearing from a lot of American congressmen and other think tankers that so we are willing to do a lot to you, and you ask whatever you want and we'll give. Why are you going to Russia still? Why do you need Russia? Russia is already a broken country. So here I think the Americans are little reluctant to understand the Indian compulsions, and they see Russia, particularly Russia, continues to be a kind of a very negative theme in the beltway of Washington. So I mean, the power structures in Washington, there's a deep state, what they call, that they still have a kind of a Cold War view of Russians. So here I think the slight ground is broken by Biden talking to Putin on Tuesday. That, to my mind, I think is a positive factor, although the Americans tried to put it in a way that this attempt to talk to Putin was basically about domestic issues like Navalny affairs and other opposition activities and human rights activities. So that apart, I think the press releases released from both sides were talking about the couple of issues. One is the renewal of New START, the nuclear agreement, which was agreed, and that was a positive thing. And the two sides also agreed in terms of the critical stability activities in various sectors. So how detailed they were discussed these things, probably they didn't. But it's a starting point because US and Russia have a lot to contribute in the stability of the Middle East particularly. So first coming to Syria, where I think it's ripe for some kind of stability, and so there is a place where they can work together. And second, the issue of Iran. So Mr. Srinivasan mentioned that Americans would like India also to convince the Iranians to be more reasonable. So similarly, I spoke to the many Iranians close to the regime. They mentioned that why not we talk to the American administration and get this relationship back to normalcy. This was during the Trump administration. So during the Trump administration, there's nothing that one could do really about because the policy was very strong in terms of anti-Iranian view. So with Biden coming, I think there is a greater interest to come back to JCPOA and get Iranians come back to respect the terms of the agreement that was signed. So here, of course, they are both trying to one-upmanship in terms of who will come first, to come first. Jack Sullivan, the new national security advisor, just said that they want to quickly come back to the GCPOA. Although Blinken, the Secretary of State Blinken and others were saying that it will not be so soon, so it will take some time. But I think it's right. Probably each one is trying to get an advantage. But ultimately, I think it's somewhat that is going to come fast. And second, here again, the Biden administration will have, and Congress also will have certain issues relating to Saudi Arabia and its human rights issues, particularly relating to killing of the Khashoggi, and the temporary halt to the arms supply to the Saudi Arabians, and UAE probably will make certain complicated issues play around. But I think with Israel also, I think we'll see certain certain irritants that we saw during the Obama administration. Particularly, it's all coming to Iranian issue. So here there are various issues of interest for India. So India has some close cooperation with Iranians on developing Chabahar port and connectivity to Afghanistan and Central Asia issues. So because of the sanctions that we really couldn't go forward. And so there are two aspects could happen which are of interest to India in this sector. One is the moment Biden tries to join the agreement and improve the relations with Iran in consultation with Israel, of course. The two things can happen. One is that China and Iran were trying to come out with a strategic agreement for a bigger understanding. This, I think, probably will have certain break in terms of when Iranians' preference is to come to the US, close to the US, not so much to the Chinese. So that to that extent, I think the Iranian and Chinese relationship will have certain restraints on that. Help in terms of Russia of China, stuff like Trump administration's push has really moved Russians more closer to China and more dependency on China. I think if Biden administration can do something in terms of any kind of limitations on this, Russians moving closer to China would be a great advantage also for So I think these are the areas, particularly our regional areas, where we have certain aspects that we can discuss with Americans and come more closer stance together. And the third aspect coming to more closer to India is this South Asia, where, of course, the Afghanistan issue. So now, by May 1st, according to the US Taliban agreement, US forces have to withdraw completely by May 1st. So there are about 2,500 forces are there now. Now, of course, the Biden administration has said that they are reviewing this, whether the agreement is being abided by all sides or not. So I think it's going to take a few more months, 3 more months, or something before 3 more weeks, that they say, to have an initial review. What probably the indications that are coming from the Biden administration shows that the Taliban is not really abiding by the strict stipulations of the agreement, which are basically 3 more specific issues. One is cooperating in countering terrorism, that is support other international organizations. Second, in terms of reducing violence. And third, in terms of actually genuine talks with the Afghanistan government. So the Biden administration currently view that the Taliban is faltering on all the 3 main issues. So how it's going to shape up and how the Biden administration will approach the Afghanistan issue is something that one has to look forward to. Remains, he is in position. So I think a review probably will have certain implications for peace in the region. So India has certain role in terms of, although India is being sidelined to an extent, but we have a role we can discuss with Americans and others about this issue. So there is possibility of some cooperative effort in these sides. So apart from all these international aspects where we have a certain role in terms of talking to Americans, and Americans like us to play a role. So there's something that we can contribute. But Mr. Biden, I think, will have serious problems in bringing back all the alliances. Now the Trump has fully shaken up. Now Europe wants to go in its own way, so it doesn't want to follow the lead of Americans blindly. So led by Ms. Merkel of Germany and France, they want to have a little more independent view and take some kind of non-aligned stance in terms of the rivalry between US and China. With Britain coming out of EU, I think this EU is taking a little more independent stance is likely to grow further. And so I think the NATO alliance will have some irritants. So NATO meeting is coming up next month. So the Biden and Stoltenberg discussions last Tuesday, there was an attempt to narrow down the differences, first agree on Afghanistan, what to be done, and thereafter come to other issues like China. So there's a lot going to happen soon in the coming days. So we have certain interest in all these areas. Coming back to the more of bilateral relations. So the bilateral relations, of course, a lot of positives there. The number one that is of course, we have Indo-American, Indian Americans role here in USA. I think that's the most positive factor that's playing up in this relationship. Even Trump, before coming to power, so he had certain very unrespectful comments on Indians in America. But as it goes now, towards the end of his career, he was come to praise particularly the Indians' contribution to technological progress of this country. So he mentioned the names of the CEOs of major companies, the Google, the Microsoft, and a number of other companies which are now being headed by Indian Americans. So the administrations from Clinton onwards, that we see that the Indo-American contribution has been really at a high level. So actually the nuclear agreement that was signed, it was because it was a major effort by the Indian Americans. So Obama, who was then senator and who was opposing the nuclear agreement and was not even willing to talk to Indian diplomats at that point of time, it was the Indian Americans who took Indian diplomats to Obama's office and got him convinced of it. So the role of Indian Americans in this, of course, is tremendous. I think that's moving spirit of this relationship. So in view of that, that's the progress of that can be seen in terms of selection of Harris as vice president of this country. And there's huge number of Indian Americans now in the administration. So mind you that just because that we have a lot of Indian Americans in the administration, that automatically flow in terms of very positive understanding of Indian government. So they see two aspects of India as such. They are, of course, as well Indian government. There are certain irritants at this point of time. So that will, of course, may not play up too much in terms of the relationship, but they will remain as irritants as you go by. So Biden administration has been heavily supported, funded by some of the organizations which are not very friendly to India. So their influence on the Biden administration will be limited. It is not going to be overwhelming, but it is limited. That could create some kind of irritants in terms of some resolutions in the some committee coming around. But I think when you see the overall relationship, that may not really affect the relationship to that extent. But in terms of the many of this, some of the discussions that I had with this staffers, particularly the incoming Indian American Americans in the administration, they said that see, there's kind of some gap in understanding in terms of the Indian interests and what Indian expectations are. So there's clear divide on that, definitely, for a long time on a number of issues. So the often repeated complaint was the Indians do a lot of lectures and do little in terms of improving this relationship. So there's quite many that we have spoken to about Russia, we have spoken about Iran, and then of course the trade relations that all have already been touched by Mr. Srinivasan. We have high tariffs on some of the products that America wants to sell to India. So the fact that we couldn't really deal with it, and in terms of come to a certain kind of understanding, starting with Obama administration onwards. So I think we have serious issues in those areas, in the trade areas. I think probably will the frequency during Trump administration shows the kind of serious irritants that are there in the trade relations. So these are not really insurmountable, but I think we could do some kind of hard bargaining, give certain areas where that are not very important for us, which are really boggled down in terms of bureaucratic complexities in India, and demand some kind of higher returns from US. And that's a possibility, and I think that the Indian administration is already on it. I think we'll have sooner or later some kind of trade agreement. So these are minor irritants that are really curtailing in terms of our relationship coming more forward to this. So then the other major issue I think that India needs to explain to Americans is in terms of America wants India to be its ally, or some kind of that. So it wants perhaps that we break up our relations with Russians and be more on the American side. So we have a problem here in terms of our revised non-aligned policy in terms of maintaining our strategic independence. So here I think a lot to be explained to Americans why our Russian relationship is important. So this often comes even in my discussions with American authorities as well as American think tanks more often. Basically, so there's still a lot of misunderstanding about India's equations with Russia. See, one aspect, of course, that the US must understand is that Russians, of course, between Russia and India, there have never been any issue of conflict, never. Russia has problems with Chinese, the ups and downs in their relationships. So Russia wants India to be a kind of friend in terms of also to keep China at bay. For example, when Russians want India to be part of the SCO and other areas, basically Russian interest was to have India as a counter in its relations in the area and also in Central Asia, where China was fast expanding because of the money power. But of course, Chinese wanted Pakistan to come into as a counter to India there. So Russians have interest in terms of not only just about other issues, but in terms of as a counter force in its relations with China. So there you have a possibility that we need to play a role there in SCO and other areas where we can keep a kind of check on the Chinese growing influence in that area. Although, despite limited resources, I think that's one area that Russians wanted us to play there. Now, with Americans pushing Russians to go to the lap of Chinese, we have certain problems there. So here, the Americans must understand the Indian role in terms of what Russians want there. So, and this issue will come up soon about the CAPSA and sanctions about S-400 missile defense being purchased by India. So whether the Biden administration is not committed yet. So when questions raised, they have not committed to whether they are going to give a sanction, some kind of relief on that or not. So these are the issues I think need to be more discussed and debated with Americans as things move forward. So other areas, most of the areas, of course, being already well covered. So unless there are certain questions, I think probably I'll take a break here and come back when those questions come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sir. It was a well-researched, well-studied, practical talk you have made. But I think I fear that we were to stop by 8:30 Indian time. But I do have one or two questions to ask. I think Srinivasan sir and for Alexander Kurian is I think not here. For the Kurian.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Kurian,
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. Srinivas sir, actually you and Prasad sir and Father Kurian also, I do want to ask one small question and we will wind it up. Actually, the Iranian point, it was so interesting. You made a point that what India can do towards the US relation, towards US, as far as vis-a-vis Iran is concerned. And Prasad sir also has put that point across. I think we will do a small talk on that part. Maybe a Indian soft power will do for Iran, or will it be and if we enter into such a strategic or a soft power towards Iran, what will be our new this Trump administration is fag has entered into a political relationship with Israel and the Arab countries. What will be that for India and will be continuing? These 2 points I would like both of you to elaborate. I think Father Kurian has left or maybe he is cut off or some issues. I think first Srinivasan sir can answer and then followed by Prasad sir and once. Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
you can
on
say.
Iran, the only reality today, because Middle East has completely changed since JCPOA was signed. So many things have happened in the region. But what has not changed is Iran's financial difficulties and need for funding. So that is the crucial thing. How soon Mr. Biden is willing to lift the sanctions. If he doesn't lift the sanctions, Iran will go all the way to the nuclear weapon stage. Already he has started enriching 20%, which is unacceptable. So the only point which has not changed is Iran is still willing to abide by the JCPOA because they are having hard times. And so that may help. But I don't think that we can play a role there because they're already in consultation with the 6 powers who were party to this. And what Iran wants is an unconditional extension. And the United States have problems with that because of the new situation in the Middle East. So India does not have a real role there. I mean, soft power, etc., doesn't come into this. Our concern is only that our trade with Iran doesn't suffer because of all these. And also we have to remember that Iran has got closer to China. In fact, that railway line, which is to be built from Chabahar, Bayas, has been given away to China. It's a major change. So we have our own problems with Iran. And so if there is peace and no tension, it will be good for us. So our presence, our role will be watching and helping in the process in any way we can. But I don't think that we have a decisive position on this. Father George's last part of his presentation had a couple of points to make, one on China and on the other on liberties. See, when I talk about our concerns in India-US relations, I'm talking about survival concerns, you know, our existence, our needs, etc. But these two things that he mentioned as difficulties, one Pakistan and the other human rights, these are simply emotional and rational and what shall we say, principal questions. They are not so relevant. Without Pakistan, also United States can continue. It is only in the context of Afghanistan that this will continue. And once Afghanistan is over, Mr. Biden will be quite happy to say goodbye to Pakistan. That's what I believe. And as far as religious freedom and other freedoms, etc., are concerned, everybody knows that India has a very active press, a very active public opinion, very active judiciary. If the Americans know that, they need not worry about the so-called violations of human rights and all that. So that's what they should know. They should understand that India has these problems, and these problems will have to resolve, whether Americans like it or not. Kashmir 370 was very important for us. Citizenship is very important. We are not interfering in the American situation on immigration, are we? What other countries, what they do, or what they do internally. We don't say any of those things. So I don't think if there is goodwill, those 2 points that Father George mentioned at the very end should not be of any concern. And with his role in policy making, I hope he'll emphasize that. Because for India, these are substantive existential issues, while for the United States, it's simply a matter of principle. Thank you.
Should I take it on? Can you hear me?
Thank you,
Can
Srinivas
you hear me?
sir. I would like Prasad to talk on the subject on Iran part. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll wind it up, I think so. Father Kurian has already left. He sent a message to me. He has left.
Okay. So the Iranian issue, of course, yes, to Mr. Srinivas was saying that we really don't have a role in terms of the peace process and in terms of the current negotiating stances that are taking place. So the Iranian issue, the Middle East issue has become more complicated over the period of time. So now today, the Iranian and Saudi ideological and leadership contest in the region has become much more complicated with this nuclear factor. One is nuclear factor, and second is Iran is expanding in terms of the pro-Iranian militias have expanded in many of the regions, starting from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. So there's a more complicated Iranian security role in the region, which is complicating the relationship with Israel as well as the Gulf countries. So here India is trying to develop its relationship with both the Gulf countries. We have wonderful relations with Gulf countries now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel, of course, for a long time we have this relationship. So now there is really both the Saudis as well as Iranians are basically questioning us in terms of why do you want to the other side, why do you not this side. So each one likes India to be on their side. So again, like our non-aligned policy in terms of the US, Russia. So here also we need both of them. We need our economic development. India's interests are best served to have better relations with all these countries. So where we can be helpful. We can't be much helpful in terms of what's really going on in terms of the negotiations, because there is a larger players now, the vehement, I mean, more strongly opposed players now. Now, Trump administration has created a problem here. The Trump administration has fully shaken this aspect now for Biden to simply walk into that, for a simple reason that now Israel has relations with South UAE, Sudan, Bahrain. So this relationship was created in a way so that they can impede any Biden administration's ability to come back to JCPOA and improve this Iranian standing in that. So this is going to be a more complicated issue how US Biden administration is going to trade with. So having said that, so we can't really jump into any of these things. So we have to just watch and see and hope that US and Iranians both will come back to JCPOA in some kind of to keep China-Iranian relations grow at a level of dependency on each other. So I think that's important for our interest to have Iranians more part of this JCPOA and improved relations with the United States to have a better atmosphere for India and not so better atmosphere for the Chinese. So in that context, of course, that the Iranians are very tough bargainers in terms of they have no love lost for either India or China. They want basically their interests served. They want the Chabahar built. So they see that only India could get their relief from sanctions to build the Chabahar port. So to that extent, they are interested in India to build this port and economically help them on. So when India cannot do that, of course, they go to China. So China will have no compulsions in terms of relief from US sanctions. They can do certain things what they can do. So so we can have some relief, some kind of helpful support if Americans and the Iranians could hit upon some kind of understanding. So here, where Saudi is fit, where Israel is fit, is an important question. So France has made a proposal that probably we have another set of discussions and negotiations where Saudi Arabia also can be brought in. So in terms of bringing a little more consensus towards the stability of the region. Iran, of course, rejected that proposal, but a proposal somewhat similar to that without really raising the antennas and questions from various countries. So if Biden administration can show a little more diplomatic effort to bring these two countries to some kind of understanding, that's how our interests and the American interests and European interests better. So that's, I think, what I see from Iranian point of view. Yeah, thank you.
I think we can. We have a great discussion. We have a good intro from Srinivasan sir. He touched all aspects. We heard out Father Alexander Kurian, who is a senior United States government official. We had a detailed discussion on all the security aspects on the Quad, on Indo-Pacific, on Iran, and everything related to that Middle East policy from our Prasad sir, who was its cabinet secretary for so long and who know the intricacies of the game. He has been in touch with the American think tanks, the American diplomats, and I think, and Srinivasan sir has very relevantly told right now that this Pakistan issue, that Biden may say goodbye to Pakistan once the Afghanistan issue is resolved, and also not to interfere our issues because we have a strong, vibrant press, we have a strong judiciary, and we have a strong democracy. So that's our point. So I think it was a well thought out discussion. I think I do thank Mr. Srinivasan sir for having set the ball rolling for the discussion. I thank Father Alexander Kurian for having participated in the program, and I do thank for Prasad sir for giving us a very deep, in-depth analysis on security aspects of vis-a-vis India and the US. I do thank my friends who are here. I do thank my partner, my director, Raju, who is here from the Center for Policy and Development Studies. I do thank Santosh, who has been here, who has been regular to us. I do thank Mini, I do thank Anju, and I do thank a lot of our friends and our well-wishers who are here to listen to the program. Thank you very much. It was a good evening. I do thank Prasad sir and Srinivasan sir over here, and I do thank Father Alexander Kurian. It's a very discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you all.